The sky bled crimson as Zara Sullivan's wagon wheel snapped with a sickening crack, sending her lurching forward against the wooden seat. Beyond the aspen trees, storm clouds gathered like angry specters over the Colorado mountains, promising a deluge that would make her broken axle even more disastrous. "Whoa there," she called to her mare, pulling back on the reins. The temperature had been dropping steadily since noon, and now in the fading October light of 1878, Zara felt the first shiver of what might be more than just evening chill. She climbed down from the wagon, her black boots sinking into mud as she assessed the damage. At 24, Zara had traveled alone from Boston to Denver following her father's death, carrying little more than determination, and the deed to land she'd inherited but never seen. The journey west had been arduous, but this final leg through the mountain pass was proving to be the most treacherous. "Perfect," she muttered, pushing a loose strand of chestnut hair back beneath her bonnet. The wheel wasn't merely broken, it was shattered beyond repair. Worse, the fever she'd been fighting since morning was becoming impossible to ignore, her skin alternating between burning and freezing as sweat beaded on her forehead. The first drops of rain splattered against her face as she grabbed her satchel and the small wooden box containing her father's letters. With the horse's reins in hand, she began trudging up the path, praying that the cabin marked on her crude map wasn't much farther. By the time the small structure came into view, Zara was stumbling more than walking. The rain had soaked through her wool coat and her vision swam with each step. The cabin seemed abandoned, no smoke from the chimney, no light in the single window. It was shelter nonetheless. She secured her horse beneath the small lean-to attached to the side of the cabin, fumbling with frozen fingers to remove the saddle. The door to the cabin was stiff but unlocked, opening with a groan of protest. Inside was Spartan but dry, a small table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, a cold fireplace, and cupboards that might hold supplies. Zara barely managed to close the door behind her before her legs gave way. She dragged herself to the bed, every movement an effort against the fever that now raged through her body. Outside, thunder crashed as she pulled a threadbare blanket over her shivering form, darkness claiming her consciousness before she could even attempt to light a fire. She drifted in and out of awareness, time losing all meaning. Sometimes she thought she heard voices, her father calling her name, her mother singing the lullaby from her childhood. Once she was certain someone was in the cabin with her, the scent of coffee and wet leather reaching through her delirium, but when she forced her eyes open, there was only darkness. "You're burning up, madam." The voice cut through her fever dreams, deep and unfamiliar. Zara struggled to focus, making out the silhouette of a broad-shouldered man crouched beside the bed. A fire crackled in the previously cold hearth, casting the cabin in dancing orange light. "Who?" Her voice cracked, throat parched. "Name's August Jameson," he said, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "Found you half dead when I came to check on my winter cabin. Storm's got us trapped for now." August helped her sit up enough to sip water from a tin cup. His hands were rough but gentle, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a worn hat. In her feverish state, Zara couldn't determine if he was savior or threat. "My horse," she managed to whisper, "fed and watered, she's fine." He moved back to the fireplace, adding another log. "You've got mountain fever by the looks of it, been hitting folks hard this season." Zara wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion pulled her back into darkness. When she next woke, a new fire was burning, though the one she remembered had surely died hours before. The cabin was warmer now, and a pot bubbled on a hook above the flames. August sat at the table, cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice stronger than before. He glanced up, his movements pausing. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time, weathered face with a strong jaw darkened by stubble, eyes the color of the sky before a storm, and hair the shade of wet sand pushed back from his forehead. "Just past midnight," he replied, setting the rifle aside. You've been out almost a full day. Zara tried to sit up but fell back against the pillow, dizzy. I need to reach Silver Creek. I have land there. Silver Creek's still 15 miles north, August said, crossing to her and offering more water. And you're not going anywhere until that fever breaks. I don't have time to be ill, she insisted, even as another wave of chills racked her body, his mouth curved slightly. Fever doesn't much care about your schedule, Miss Sullivan, Zara Sullivan. Well, Miss Sullivan, I reckon you've got two choices: stay put and let me help, or try to leave and collapse in the mud before you make it 10 yards. She wanted to argue but couldn't summon the energy. Why are you helping me? August returned to the fireplace, stirring whatever was in the pot. Would you rather I'd left you to die? No, but then stop asking fool questions and rest. His tone was gruff, but there was something gentle beneath it. I'll keep the fire going. True to his word, August maintained the fire through the night. Zara drifted between sleep and wakefulness, sometimes finding him reading by firelight, other times staring out the window at the raging storm. Once she woke to find him dozing in the chair he'd dragged near the bed, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. By morning, her fever still burned, but her mind was clearer. August fed her broth and tea brewed with herbs he'd found in his supplies. How long have you had this cabin? She asked, watching him move about the small space with the ease of familiarity. 5 years. Use it mainly during hunting season or when I'm moving cattle through these parts. He glanced at her. My main ranch is about 20 miles south. You're a rancher then, he nodded. Got a decent spread, nothing compared to some, but it's mine. He paused. What brings a Boston lady to Silver Creek? I can hear the East in your voice. Zara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. Yet something in his steady gaze encouraged trust. My father died 6 months ago. I discovered he owned land here, a homestead claim from before I was born. I've come to see it, perhaps sell it. August's expression shifted slightly. Silver Creek's growing since the new silver strike. Land's valuable. He handed her more tea. You have family waiting for you. No, my mother passed when I was 16, and my father. She looked away. We weren't close in his final years. The second night, her fever worsened again. Zara thrashed against the blankets, haunted by memories twisted into nightmares. Her father's disappointed face when she refused the marriage he'd arranged with his business partner's son. The scandal when she'd taken a position as a schoolteacher, instead of accepting her prescribed role in Boston society. Through it all, she was dimly aware of August's presence, his voice murmuring reassurances, his hand steadying her when she tried to rise in delirium, the consistent sound of him adding logs to maintain the fire's warmth. Once, she grabbed his wrist, certain she was dying. Promise you'll deliver my father's letters to Silver Creek, she pleaded. The wooden box in my satchel. You'll deliver them yourself, he said firmly, his calloused hand covering hers. I didn't ride through this storm just to watch you give up. Why did you come out in the storm? She asked, momentarily lucid. August was silent for a long moment. Had a feeling, he finally said. Don't usually check this cabin till later in the season, but something told me to ride up yesterday. He adjusted the blanket over her shoulders. Good thing I listened. By the third day, Zara's fever finally broke. She woke to sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window, feeling weak but clear-headed for the first time since arriving. August was outside. She could hear him chopping wood. She pushed herself up, surprised at how difficult even that small movement was. The cabin looked different in daylight, less foreboding, more utilitarian. August had clearly been living there while tending to her. His saddle rested in one corner, saddlebags nearby. Coffee grounds and tin plates sat by a wash basin. A deck of worn cards was spread on the table as if he'd been playing solitaire to pass the hours. When he came inside with an armload of wood, he stopped short, seeing her sitting up. You're awake, he said, a smile warming his features. Without the shadow of his hat, she could see his eyes were a deeper blue than she'd thought, crinkled at the corners from years in the sun. Thanks to you, she replied, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she wore only her chemise and petticoat, her dress presumably removed during the worst of her fever. August seemed to sense her discomfort. "Your dress is hanging behind the door." "I had to remove it when your fever was highest. Hope you don't mind the impropriety. There's fresh water in the basin if you'd like to wash up." He set down the wood and moved toward the door. "I'll give you privacy." When he returned, Zara had managed to dress and arrange her hair in a simple braid. She still felt weak but determined to show improvement. "The storm's passed," August said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Trail's still muddy but passable. Once you've regained your strength, I can take you to Silver Creek." "I've imposed on you enough," she began, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. "Your wagon's got a broken axle and you're still recovering. Besides, these mountains are no place for a woman alone, especially one who doesn't know the territory." Zara bristled slightly. "I managed to get from Boston to Denver on my own, and nearly died in a cabin 5 miles from nowhere," he countered, though his tone held no mockery. "Accept help when it's offered, Miss Sullivan. Out here, pride can kill faster than any fever." She knew he was right, but had spent too long fighting for independence to surrender it easily. "I can pay you for your trouble." August's expression hardened slightly. "I didn't help you for money." "Then why did you?" The question had been nagging at her since she'd first awakened to find him tending the fire. He was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. 3 years ago, my younger brother caught mountain fever while we were hunting. I went for a doctor, but the storm trapped me in town." His voice grew rougher. "By the time I got back, he was gone, found him by a cold fireplace." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I wasn't going to let that happen again if I could help it." The rawness of his grief silenced any further protests Zara might have made. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said softly. August nodded once, then changed the subject. "You should eat something, build your strength." They shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and the last of the sourdough bread he'd brought. As they ate, Zara learned more about August Jameson. At 32, he'd been in Colorado Territory for nearly a decade, arriving after fighting in the war. He'd worked as a cowhand before winning his ranch in a poker game from a man eager to return east. The ranch, the Diamond J, was modest but growing. "What about you?" he asked. "Not many women would travel alone to claim land they've never seen." Zara traced the rim of her cup. "I had few options in Boston after refusing the marriage my father arranged. When he died and I discovered the deed among his papers, it seemed like providence." She hesitated. The scandal of being a spinster schoolteacher was becoming tiresome. Spinster at 24, August's lips quirked. "Eastern folks have strange notions. Society has rigid expectations for women," she replied. "My refusal to conform made me unwelcome in many circles. Out here, folks care more about whether you can work hard and stand your ground than about society rules." He studied her face. "Something tells me you do just fine." That evening, Zara insisted on helping prepare supper, though her movements were still slow. Standing beside August at the small table, slicing potatoes while he prepared a rabbit he'd snared, she felt an unexpected ease in his presence. There was none of the posturing she'd grown accustomed to from men in Boston, just a straightforward competence that was oddly comforting. "Tomorrow we'll try getting you outside for some air," he said. "If that goes well, we can head to Silver Creek the following day." Zara nodded, though she felt a strange reluctance at the thought of leaving the cabin. These close quarters with a stranger should have been uncomfortable, yet there was something about August that inspired trust. "You've been extraordinarily kind," she said. 3 nights keeping watch over a stranger." "You're not exactly a stranger anymore," he replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his task. That night, August insisted she keep the bed while he made a pallet near the fire. Zara woke in the darkest hours to find him adding logs to the flames, his silhouette outlined in orange light. "You should sleep," she said softly. He glanced over, not seeming surprised to find her awake. "Soon enough." You've barely rested these past days, August shrugged. I'm used to long nights during calving season. Zara watched him, this man who'd saved her life with no expectation of reward. In Boston, every interaction seemed to come with hidden calculations of advantage or status. August's straightforward kindness was as refreshing as it was unfamiliar. Tell me about your land in Silver Creek, he said, settling back against his saddle. I know very little, she admitted. The deed shows 160 acres with a creek running through it. My father's letters mention a small house and barn he built before returning east. That would be the old Sullivan place, August said, surprising her. North edge of town, up against the foothills, good water, decent grazing land, you know it, he nodded. Rode past it many times. Been empty for years, though the McPherson family's been using the pasture for their sheep by informal arrangement with the county, since no one claimed ownership. Zara felt a surge of curiosity. What's it like, the house, I mean? Simple cabin, sturdier than this one, 2 rooms, if I recall. Barns small but sound. He poked at the fire. Land's the real value, water rights alone would fetch a good price from any rancher looking to expand. Did you know my father when he was here? August shook his head. Before my time, but old-timers in town might remember him. They talked until dawn, August describing Silver Creek, the general store run by the widow Chen. The saloon where cowboys and miners mingled uneasily. The small church that doubled as a schoolhouse 3 days a week. Zara found herself trying to picture her reserved, formal father in such a place, and failing. The next day, as promised, August helped her venture outside. The air was crisp with early autumn, the storm having cleared to reveal mountains painted with gold and crimson foliage. Zara's legs trembled with weakness, but August's arm around her waist provided steady support as they walked slowly around the cabin. Her mare nickered a greeting from the lean-to, and Zara stroked the animal's nose while August checked the horse's legs for any injuries. She's a good animal, he commented, steady, not what I'd expect from a city lady. My father taught me to ride when I was young, Zara said, before he... She trailed off, unsure how to explain the change in her father after her mother's death, how he'd retreated into his business affairs and rigid propriety, leaving behind the man who'd once lifted her onto her first pony. August didn't press, just nodded as if he understood what she couldn't articulate. They ate lunch outside, seated on a fallen log while August pointed out landmarks the pass that led to Denver. The distant peak locals called Widow's Cap for its white crown that remained snow-covered year-round, the valley where his ranch lay beyond sight. Have you always been alone at your ranch? Zara asked, immediately regretting the personal nature of the question. August didn't seem offended. Got 3 cowhands who help with the cattle. Ramon's been with me since the beginning, best tracker I've ever known. The Cooley brothers joined last spring. He squinted at the horizon. But if you're asking if I've got a wife, the answer's no. Zara felt heat rise to her face. I wasn't sure you were, he said, but his tone was light. Most folks wonder why a man my age isn't settled. And why aren't you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Almost was once, Emily Fontaine. Her father owned the mercantile in Silver Creek. He picked up a stick, turning it in his hands. She died of influenza winter before last, month before the wedding. I'm sorry, Zara said softly, understanding better his determination to save her from a similar fate. August tossed the stick away. Life out here is beautiful but harsh. Teaches you to value what matters and let go of what doesn't. He glanced at her. Probably why I don't have much patience for society rules that keep people from living honestly. That evening, Zara felt strong enough to insist on cooking. August watched with barely concealed amusement as she struggled with the unfamiliar cast iron and open flame, but he didn't intervene except to prevent the beans from boiling over. Not quite the kitchen you're used to, he observed, as she finally managed to produce a passable meal. I was never much in the kitchen at home, she admitted. "We had a cook, but I learned basics when I took rooms of my own after Father's disapproval became too difficult to bear." They ate in companionable silence, both aware that tomorrow would likely be their last day at the cabin. August had announced at lunch that her strength seemed sufficient for the journey to Silver Creek if they took it slow, as darkness fell. August stoked the fire one last time before settling on his pallet. Zara lay in the bed, listening to his breathing, strangely reluctant for morning to arrive. In just 3 days, this stranger had become something more, not quite a friend, but something undefined that made the prospect of parting unexpectedly difficult. "August," she said into the darkness, "thank you, not just for saving my life, but for—" She paused, searching for words. "For treating me as a person, not a burden or a curiosity." There was a long silence, and then his deep voice replied, "You're welcome, Zara." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his mouth made her heart beat faster. Sleep was long in coming that night. Morning brought a flurry of preparation. August repacked his saddlebags while Zara gathered her meager possessions. They worked around each other in the small cabin, the ease of previous days replaced by a strange tension neither acknowledged. "We'll have to ride double," August said as he saddled both horses. "Your mare can carry our supplies, but she needs rest after standing idle these days." Zara nodded, trying to ignore the implications of sharing a saddle for the 15-mile journey. Her fever was gone, but a different kind of heat threatened each time August's hand accidentally brushed hers during preparations. Before they departed, August secured the cabin, explaining he might not return until winter. Zara took a last look at the simple shelter that had witnessed her brush with death and unexpected recovery, feeling an odd sentimentality for its rough walls and smoky hearth. The ride to Silver Creek was slow but not unpleasant. Seated before August on his sturdy gelding, Zara was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he managed the reins. They spoke little, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. The landscape unfolded before them, rugged mountains giving way to gentler foothills, aspens shimmering gold against evergreens, meadows where August pointed out deer grazing at the forest edge. Once they spotted a black bear with 2 cubs foraging in a berry thicket, and August quietly directed his horse wide around the animals. "First bear?" he asked when they'd passed safely. "Yes," Zara admitted, "though I read about them in books." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Books don't quite capture the size of them, do they?" By midday, they stopped to rest beside a stream. August helped her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped away to water the horses. Zara stretched, muscles stiff from riding. "How much farther?" "About 7 miles, he replied, glancing at the sun. "We'll reach town by late afternoon if we keep this pace." They shared jerky and the last of the sourdough, feet dangling over the stream bank. A comfortable silence settled between them until August spoke unexpectedly. "What will you do when you see your land? Still planning to sell?" Zara considered the question. "I'm not certain anymore. When I left Boston, selling seemed the only logical choice." She watched the water flowing over smooth stones. "But now I wonder if there might be possibilities I hadn't considered." August studied her profile. Silver Creek could use a schoolteacher, towns growing fast with the new mine bringing in families. "Are you suggesting I stay?" she asked, meeting his gaze, just pointing out options. He looked away, but not before she caught something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Land's yours to do with as you please." They resumed their journey, the conversation turning to practical matters of Silver Creek, where she might find lodging, which merchants were fair with their prices, who might help assess her property's value if she chose to sell. As the sun began its westward descent, the town appeared in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys, the glint of a church steeple catching the light. "There it is," August said, his voice close to her ear. "Silver Creek." Zara felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension as they approached. This place her father had once called home now represented either an end to her journey or perhaps an unexpected beginning. They rode down the main street, attracting curious glances from townspeople. Zara was conscious of how they must appear her in a wrinkled dress after days in a cabin, seated before August on his horse, her mare following with their supplies. August directed his mount toward a two-story building with a sign reading Silver Creek Hotel. As they stopped, a portly man with an impressive mustache emerged onto the porch. "Jameson, didn't expect to see you in town till the cattle drive." His curious gaze shifted to Zara. August dismounted before helping Zara down. "Howard, this is Miss Zara Sullivan. She's come to claim her father's property north of town." Miss Sullivan, Howard Pickering, owner of this establishment and mayor of Silver Creek. The mayor's eyebrows shot up. "Sullivan, Robert Sullivan's girl." At Zara's nod, he beamed. "Well, I'll be. Your father and I prospected together before he tried his hand at ranching. Built that place himself, he did, before heading back east." He extended a hand to Zara. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Sullivan." August secured them rooms at the hotel, insisting on paying for Zara's despite her protests. "You can settle your debt once you're established," he said quietly, brooking no argument. That evening, after Zara had bathed and changed into her spare dress, she joined August for dinner in the hotel's small dining room. The town's curiosity about her arrival was evident in the glances cast their way, but August's presence seemed to discourage direct inquiries. "Everyone's staring," she murmured as the waitress brought their food. "Small town," August replied. "New faces are rare enough. A beautiful woman arriving with me is practically a scandal." Zara flushed at the casual compliment. "Will it damage your reputation to be seen with a woman of questionable propriety?" she asked, half joking. His smile was slow and warm. "I reckon my reputation can withstand it." After dinner, they sat on the hotel's front porch, watching the town settle into evening routines. Lamps were lit in windows. Cowboys emerged from the livery headed toward the saloon. Shopkeepers locked their doors for the night. "Tomorrow I can take you to see your property," August offered. "Early before I head back to my ranch," Zara nodded, suddenly reluctant to think about August leaving. These few days had created a connection she hadn't anticipated, one that made the prospect of his departure surprisingly painful. "Will you be back in town soon?" she asked, trying to sound merely curious. August studied her face in the fading light. "Hadn't planned to be, but plans can change." He paused. "Depends partly on whether there's reason to return." The question hung unspoken between them, neither quite brave enough to address what had begun to grow in the confines of that small cabin. Morning brought clear skies and cooler temperatures. August waited with the horses as Zara emerged from the hotel. Having traded her travel-worn dress for her last clean outfit, a practical blue skirt and white shirtwaist that had once seemed plain in Boston, but now felt almost formal in Silver Creek. They rode north out of town, Zara on her mare this time, following a well-used trail that paralleled a swift-flowing creek. After about 2 miles, August gestured to the right where a narrower path led toward a stand of cottonwoods. "There it is," he said, "the Sullivan place." Zara reined in her horse, taking in the sight of what was legally hers but utterly unfamiliar. A small cabin nestled against the hillside, weathered but intact. A barn stood nearby, its door hanging slightly ajar. Beyond stretched meadowland dotted with wildflowers, rising gradually toward pine-covered slopes. "It's beautiful," she whispered, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. They dismounted, tying the horses to a hitching post that still stood before the cabin. August let Zara approach the door alone, understanding instinctively her need to take this step herself. The door opened with a creak of protest. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through 2 small windows. The furnishings were sparse but sturdy: a table with 3 chairs, a cast iron stove, shelves built into one wall, a bed frame with no mattress. A doorway led to a second, smaller room. "Your father built good furniture," August commented, running his hand over the table's smooth surface. "Solid craftsmanship." Zara moved through the space slowly, trying to imagine her stern, proper father living here, building this place with his hands. On the mantel above a stone fireplace sat a small, carved wooden horse, its features simple but recognizable. She picked it up, wondering at its significance. "There's a spring behind the house," August said. "Never runs dry, even in August, and the creek land is good for crop soils rich." Zara nodded absently, opening the door to the second room. It was smaller, with a window facing east and empty shelves along one wall. A child's room, perhaps, or meant to be. Had her father built it with the intention of bringing a family here one day, they explored the barn next, finding it sound despite years of disuse. Evidence of sheep was visible in the trampled grass of the adjacent pasture, confirming what August had said about the McPhersons using the land. Standing in the doorway of the barn, looking out over what was now her property, Zara felt a sense of possibility she hadn't expected. This place that had been merely a deed in a box of papers now seemed alive with potential. "What do you think?" August asked, coming to stand beside her. "I think." She hesitated, surprised by her own thoughts. "I think I might not sell after all." August's expression revealed nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. "It's good land. Would be a shame to see it go to someone who wouldn't appreciate it. Could I make a life here?" The question was partly to herself, partly to him. "You could," he said simply. "It would be hard work, especially alone, but you've already shown you're stronger than you look." They spent the next hour walking the property, August pointing out its features with the eye of a rancher where the best grazing would be, which slopes got the most sun for gardens, how the creek curved to provide natural boundaries. As noon approached, they returned to the cabin, sitting on the porch steps to share the lunch the hotel had packed for them. The conversation flowed easily between practical matters and personal reflections, both aware that August would soon need to depart for his ranch. "The town council meets tonight," August said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Mayor Pickering mentioned they're looking to hire a teacher before winter sets in. If you're considering staying, might be worth attending." Zara nodded, touched by his continued concern for her future. "I will." "Thank you." The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. At the hotel, August helped Zara dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I should head back," he said, though he made no move to mount his horse. "Ranch won't run itself." "Of course," Zara replied, equally reluctant to say goodbye. "I can't thank you enough for everything." August shifted his weight, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'll be bringing cattle to the railhead in 3 weeks. We'll pass through town then." "I'll look forward to it," she said, meaning it more than she could express. He nodded once, then surprised her by taking her hand and briefly pressing it to his lips. "Take care, Zara Sullivan." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and rode away, not looking back. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Zara settled into Silver Creek. The town council, impressed by her education and teaching experience, hired her immediately. She divided her time between preparing the schoolhouse for the dozen children who would be her pupils and making her father's cabin habitable again. The townspeople were welcoming, if curious. The widow Chen at the general store extended credit until Zara received her first month's wages. Howard Pickering introduced her to everyone who came through the hotel. The McPherson family apologized profusely for using her pasture and offered to help repair the cabin roof in exchange for continued grazing rights through winter. Yet despite the growing connections, Zara found her thoughts drifting frequently to August. She wondered about his ranch, whether the autumn cattle work was proceeding well, if he thought of their days in the cabin as often as she did. Each morning she woke expecting to see him stoking the fire, only to remember she was alone. The wooden box containing her father's letters became an evening ritual. She would read one each night by lamplight, discovering a man she barely recognized passionate about the land, filled with dreams of building a life in the West, writing of the beauty of mountains and freedom of open spaces. Only the final letters showed the bitter, disappointed man she'd known, his tone changing after returning to Boston following her mother's death. 18 days after August's departure, not that she was counting, Zara was returning from the schoolhouse when she heard a familiar voice at the general store. Her heart quickened as she peered through the window to see August at the counter, speaking with Mrs. Chen. She smoothed her hair before entering, the little bell above the door announcing her arrival. August turned, and the smile that spread across his face at the sight of her made her breath catch. "Miss Sullivan," he said, tipping his hat, "you're looking well." "Mr. Jameson," she replied, unable to suppress her own smile. "Back in town earlier than expected." Mrs. Chen glanced between them with knowing eyes. "I just remembered inventory in the back," she said, disappearing through a curtained doorway with remarkable speed. Left alone, they stood in awkward silence until both spoke at once. "How are you settling? Your trip was—" They both laughed, tension breaking. "Ladies first," August said. "I was just going to ask about your journey. You're earlier than the 3 weeks you mentioned." August shrugged. "Cattle were ready, weather looked good, figured why wait." He paused. "Truth is, I was hoping to see how you were getting on." "I've been well," she said. "The teaching position is officially mine, and I've been staying at the cabin these past 10 days. His eyebrows rose. "Alone, Mrs. McPherson visits daily," Zara assured him, "and I'm learning quickly. Yesterday I managed to chop firewood without requiring rescue." August's expression softened. "I never doubted you'd adapt." They left the store together, walking slowly toward the hotel where August had taken a room for the night. He told her about the cattle drive preparations, and she described her work with the children of Silver Creek. "Town's been good to me," she said as they reached the hotel. "But I've missed our conversations." August studied her face. "I've missed more than conversations," he said quietly. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "As have I." He cleared his throat. "Would you join me for dinner? 7 o'clock. I'd like that very much." Dinner stretched into hours of conversation that felt like minutes. August described his ranch in detail, the main house he'd expanded twice, the bunkhouse for his hands, the herd of cattle he was slowly improving with better bloodlines. Zara shared her discoveries about her father and her growing attachment to the land she'd inherited. "I've decided to stay," she said as they lingered over coffee. "At least through spring. The teaching position is secure, and the cabin feels more like home each day." August nodded, something like relief in his expression. "That's good news, is it?" she asked boldly, tired of dancing around what had been growing between them. He set down his cup. "Yes," he said simply, "very good news." Walking her home in the moonlight, August finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "Zara, I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings," he began, "but these weeks since we parted, I've thought of little else but you." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "I've thought of you as well," she admitted, "more than is probably proper." "Proper be damned," he said with quiet intensity. "When I found you in that cabin, fighting for your life, something changed in me. And every hour I spent keeping that fire going, watching over you, talking with you once you were stronger." He broke off, searching for words. "I haven't felt this way since Emily, and even then, it wasn't the same." Zara's heart pounded as she took a step closer to him. "How is it different?" "With Emily, it was comfortable, expected. With you—" His hand came up to touch her cheek. "With you, it feels like riding into a storm knowing lightning might strike, but going anyway because some things are worth the risk." In the silver moonlight, with the sounds of the small town fading around them, Zara made a decision. She closed the distance between them, reaching up to place her hand against his chest. "Some risks are worth taking," she whispered. August's kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When she responded, arms slipping around his neck, he deepened the kiss with a hunger that matched her own. Moments or minutes passed before they broke apart, both breathing quickly. "I should go," he said reluctantly, though his arms remained around her waist. Zara nodded, though letting him walk away was the last thing she wanted. "When will you return from delivering your cattle?" "2 weeks, if the weather holds." His thumb traced her lower lip. "Unless you'd rather I didn't come back," she smiled. "I think you know the answer to that." He kissed her once more, briefly but with promise, before stepping back. 2 weeks, he repeated. "Then we'll talk about what comes next." True to his word, August returned exactly 14 days later. Zara, who'd been watching for riders from her classroom window all day, nearly dropped her chalk when she spotted him approaching the schoolhouse as children streamed out after final lessons. The youngest pupils scattered around him like excited puppies. August was already known in town for the peppermint sticks he carried in his saddlebags, while older students nudged each other and cast knowing glances between their teacher and the rancher. "Mr. Jameson," Zara greeted him formally, aware of curious eyes. "What brings you to our school?" "Thought I might escort you home, Miss Sullivan," he replied, matching her tone, though his eyes conveyed much more. "If you're amenable." They walked the mile to her cabin in the golden light of late afternoon, catching up on the events of their separation. The cattle sale had gone well. Zara's students were progressing in their studies. The town was preparing for its annual harvest festival. At her door, August finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Have you given any thought to what I said before I left?" Zara opened the door, gesturing for him to enter. Inside, the cabin had been transformed from the dusty shell they'd first visited. Curtains hung at the windows, a braided rug covered the plank floor, and wildflowers brightened the table. A fire crackled in the hearth, reminding them both of those 3 critical nights. "I've thought of little else," she admitted, removing her shawl. "But I'm curious what exactly you're proposing." August removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I'm proposing we stop pretending this is merely friendship between us." He met her gaze directly. "I'm in love with you, Zara Sullivan. Have been since I watched you fight back from fever with more courage than most men show in battle." Joy bloomed in her chest at the words she'd hoped to hear. "And I love you," she replied, watching his face transform with relief and happiness. "But there are practicalities to consider." "Such as?" "My teaching position is here. Your ranch is 20 miles away. Society would expect marriage before we." August closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I've thought about the practicalities every mile between here and Denver," he said. "I'm asking you to marry me, Zara. Not just because society expects it, but because I want to build a life with you." "And the distance?" she asked, though her heart was already decided. "I've spoken with Mayor Pickering. Silver Creek needs more than a part-time teacher now that the mine is bringing in more families. They're prepared to offer a full position to someone qualified, with housing provided at the schoolmaster's cottage in town during the week." "And weekends?" Zara asked, already guessing his plan. August smiled. "Weekends, you'd ride home with me to the ranch. In summer, when school's not in session, you'd be there full-time." He squeezed her hands. "Eventually, when the ranch can spare me more often, I'll build a house here on your land, our land. Use it when business brings me to Silver Creek, or maybe retire here someday." Zara laughed softly. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," he admitted. "I didn't plan what I'd do if you said no." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "That's fortunate, since you won't need that plan." Their kiss was both a promise and a beginning, sealing what had started in a storm-besieged cabin with a fever and a steadfastly maintained fire. They married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, with the entire town in attendance. August's ranch hands rode in for the occasion, bringing tales of their boss's uncharacteristic whistling and good humor since returning from his last trip to town. The Sullivan cabin became their weekend retreat, a place between their 2 worlds where they could be alone together, without the responsibilities of ranch or school. August expanded it that first winter, adding a proper kitchen and enlarging the second bedroom for the future, he'd said with a meaningful glance that made Zara blush. By spring, that future was already taking shape. Their first child, a daughter named Alina after Zara's mother, was born the following autumn, with Mrs. Chen and the town doctor attending while August paced outside, just as he had during those fever-racked nights. When Alina was presented to her father, wrapped in a blanket August had kept over Zara during her illness, he cradled her with hands that had once seemed too rough for such tenderness. "She has your strength," he told Zara, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "And your stubborn determination," Zara replied with a tired smile. "She refused to wait until we reached town." August laughed, sitting beside his wife and daughter. "Sullivan women never did care much for convenience," he said, pressing a kiss to Zara's forehead. 5 years later, as they celebrated Alina's birthday in the expanded Sullivan cabin with friends from town and ranch alike, Zara found August standing on the porch, looking out over the land that had brought them together. "Any regrets?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. He turned to her, the love in his eyes as steady as it had been that first night by firelight. "Only that I didn't check the cabin sooner," he said. "Could have found you a day earlier." Zara leaned her head against his shoulder, listening to the sounds of their life, Alina's laughter as she played with her younger brother, friends' voices raised in song inside. The distant lowing of cattle in the pasture August had added to the property. "3 nights by the fire was exactly what we needed," she said. "Any less and I might not have seen past the gruff exterior to the man beneath." August smiled, drawing her closer as the sun set over mountains that had once seemed forbidding but now felt like home. "Then I'm grateful for every log I added to that flame," he said. "Best fire I ever kept burning." In the years that followed, whenever storms raged or illness threatened, August and Zara would remember those first 3 nights, how a fever and a steadfast flame had forged a bond stronger than either could have imagined. Their love, like the fire August had so carefully maintained, continued to provide warmth and light through all seasons of their lives together.